My name is Andrew Betwain. I'm the editor of InsuranceInvestor.com, and today I am joined by Ben Howarth, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at ABI. Ben, how are you?
Yeah, great, thanks. How about you?
I'm brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, Ben will be speaking in November at our Insurance Investor Live conference for their Europe conference. He'll be speaking on a panel discussion around climate change and especially around the rising to the net zero challenge. So a big, broad topic with lots to discuss. So Ben, I want to start off by asking, as you are a representative of an industry body, what do you see from members in terms of activity around net zero and decarbonisation? Are you racing to catch up with their renovations, or are the elements that still need convincing in the sector that you guys are having to do a bit of pushing towards?
It's a really interesting question. I think we see, if you look across the ABI's membership and the range of business models that we represent, right across from general insurance in personal lines to big commercial lines insurance to pensions, investments, and health and protection, you see almost every aspect of the net zero and climate change policy debate being covered by our members. And I think it's fair to say that members are looking at this from a wide range of angles. But what I would say as a general theme is I think every member is rapidly increasing the amount of activity they put into this area. I think everyone acknowledges that it is a significant long-term threat to the economy and to the business models of our sector, and it's one that everyone has to grapple with. I'd say one thing that I see in particular is a really high level of senior engagement from the CEOs in the industry. And I think if I reflect on when we were putting our climate change roadmap together, which we did in 2021, and also we published a sort of 1-year progress report on it last month. When I reflect on that, I see a real hands-on approach from senior leaders, CEOs. They really are very focused on this, and I think they see it as one of their absolute top priorities. So it's that real senior engagement, and also just that full looking at it from a kind of a risk perspective, but also as a business opportunity.
That's a really fascinating insight about the CEOs taking it so seriously, because we don't hear about that in every industry. And that kind of builds into my next question, what you were mentioning there about all the different angles of the insurance industry. So how does net zero build into wider climate change goals in insurance investment? Because you mentioned there about the risk, you mentioned about very, very diverse business models. How do you see it in sort of the wider sphere of let's try and fix the world?
Yeah, I think it's right at the heart of it. I think a lot of the time what you'll hear people talk about is that climate is one part of the wider kind of ESG agenda, which is increasingly important. I think what you will also see is more and more customers demanding products that have got high climate and sustainability credentials. So this isn't just about satisfying the regulators or satisfying the government or satisfying campaigners. It's also about satisfying customers. Customers are increasingly buying into this, and it is a criteria. And sometimes that's a significant subset of customers rather than the majority, but it's enough to make this really important. I think what also you're seeing with the net zero agenda is it's about transparency, and it's about being really open about what you're doing. And I think that's where we're starting to see much more focus is it's not just about ticking a few boxes and having a few promotional materials to say, but it's about that real thorough looking at your business and how it's going to evolve. I think also for insurance, it's worth reflecting as well that this isn't just about ticking the ESG boxes and sort of gradually complying, but it is also about thinking, what does this mean? I mean, look at the recent extreme weather in the UK. A number of houses caught fire. That's a significant risk. In the winter, we see storms and flood risk going up every year. In the longer term, if you're a pension investor, just for myself, I'll be claiming my pension in 2050 when we're meant to have met these net zero goals. What will my finances look like then? So I think it really is, it's a risk management exercise as much as it is a kind of positive shaping the future exercise. And I think what you're seeing is both of those things interacting with each other.
Yeah, if it could never hit 40 degrees Celsius in London again, I'd be very happy.
Likewise.
Exactly. So you've talked us through a bit of the sort of broader, more overarching themes in the industry, and I wanted to get into some sort of slightly more granular detail here. So can you talk us through current decarbonisation strategies and goals in the wider investment market? What are they actually doing? What are you seeing your members of your bodies actually sitting down and doing?
Yeah, I think there's 4 big things that we're looking at. The first of those is the sort of actual net zero target setting agenda. So that's about looking at your portfolio and thinking about how you're going to transition over time towards one that is aligned with the Paris goals. There's some tricky issues underpinned in that, and it's that sort of balance between How do we act as stewards, and how do we start thinking about where the economy is going to change? What's the right point to sort of, where are we financing the transition, which might mean working with some businesses that currently have high carbon footprints, versus where are we actually investing in the new sectors of tomorrow. But the first strand of it is really about just gradually moving your portfolios away from high carbon into Paris aligned investments. So that's number one. I think the second, equally important, probably more important, is actually how do we invest in scale in the key technologies that are going to deliver net zero. So it's not just about moving away and out of carbon intensive, but actually thinking that there are, if you look at the government's net zero strategy, there's sort of 10 or 11 key technologies that are really going to drive net zero. We'd probably say, what I hear from members is we've probably got a really strong business investment case for two of them, and a lot of the others are still at a pretty early stage. So how do we get past that? How do we scale those things up? We need to scale them up rapidly and get the advantages. So that's about our industry's role in a much wider societal and economic challenge. The third, I think, is our own operations as businesses. And if you look across the investment model for insurers, for some of that, it's common themes that you'll see across lots of different industries, which is about sustainable IT and getting your transport emissions down. But I think where the really interesting part for our industry is, particularly on the general insurance side, is how do you make the claims that we handle more sustainable? How do you get those supply chains to be more sustainable? How do you repair cars in a more sustainable way? How do you put back homes after a flood in a more sustainable way? So that's a really key theme, is those supply chains and driving that change. And then I think the fourth is actually those interactions with customers and helping them with sustainable choices. And often the theme I would see there is that our members are probably not the only people that would do this, but they can play a key role in nudging people towards a sustainable choice. That might be through offering them more sustainable pension choices, or it might be at the point that they make a claim saying, right, this is an opportunity for you to switch to an electric vehicle or switch to a slightly more renewable or sustainable option in your home. So those are the various things that we see. And I think actually that customer interaction one is probably the one that is the hardest to do at scale, because it requires each individual business to really think about their product propositions. But it's really important, moving society towards net zero.
And so my final question is kind of looking into your crystal ball about, what we're going to see in 2023 and the big challenges and changes happening in this area. And I want to sort of, 2022 has sort of been hijacked by the fallout of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the way it's affected gas prices and oil markets, and people having to countries having to reopen coal mines and all these sort of really detrimental environmental aspects. What do you see, and what is the ABI sort of projecting there'll be the big things in 2023? Are we going to see more fallout from this, or will we see different things cropping up and different areas of focus for decarbonisation and net zero goals?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, from my perspective, although it's probably been less newsworthy than in 2021 when we had COP26, the focus for the industry on climate change definitely hasn't gone away at all. And I think actually those global challenge, much of that only makes this more important. In the long term, do we want to keep importing all of our energy from abroad, from potentially unstable markets, or do we want to utilize the renewable energy sources that are literally here and will never go away? We're never going to stop having waves or wind. So, I think as a strategic point of view, the climate change, some of this climate change stuff is an absolute no-brainer and makes economic sense. And within that, I actually do genuinely think, if you look behind the scenes at the industry, the focus on climate change has not gone down at all. If anything, it's going up this year compared to last year. And what that means, I think, for 2023, I think what you'll see in the industry is a focus, at the moment, a lot of focus on sort of setting targets and getting the transparency right and getting the financial reporting right, and kind of that big regulatory agenda. That's not finished. So there's still going to be more work on that in 2023. So, for example, we're expecting the FCA to consult quite soon on its investment labelling regime. That will be quite a big practical exercise for firms next year. But I think the big change, and it's a really significant one, is less focus on the target setting and more focus on the transition plans. So actually starting to set out, you've got your target, but what does that mean? What are the choices you have to take as a business about the products that you sell, about the things you invest in? And actually, what are the trade-offs? So I think that switch away from just declaring that you've set yourself a target and what you're aiming for, and kind of showing, I suppose, that you're on the pitch in terms of climate change. The next step is actually how we're going to do this, publishing transition plans. I think that's going to be really interesting. I think 2023 will when we start to see more and more of those transition plans published. If anything, actually, the more interesting thing is the year after. I think the first set of transition plans will be everyone kind of putting their cards on the table about what their strategy is. What'll be really interesting is when they start reading everyone else's and adapting their strategies accordingly. So if they start reading transition plans that have come from elsewhere in the economy, how do they adapt their plans? And I think that's the really interesting challenge going ahead. But 2023, I think, all about transition plans. I think that's probably the biggest exercise that you'll see in the sector. It's, to some people it might seem dry and regulatory, but I think if firms approach those transition plans in the spirit that they're intended, I think they really kind of connect up all the different strands of climate change, and they shift it away from being a kind of compliance burden to a really interesting exercise about building a business model that's kind of fit for the future economy.
There's so much to discuss here, and it's going to be a fascinating discussion in November at our Insurance Investor Live conference, where you, Ben, will be speaking on a panel discussion about this in a much broader, longer context. And so I'd like to thank you for your time today. And my name is Andrew Betwain. I am the editor of Insurance Investor. If you would like to register to attend, please go to clearpathanalysis.com and you will find a link to the investment insurance conference. And if you would like to hear more about this topic, please go to our website, insuranceinvestor.com. Thank you very much, Ben, for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks a lot.